All right, welcome back, guys, to the Heights podcast here with Coach Matt Hedrick. I'm JP Coolman. This is episode 4. We've done 4 of these, 3. This is going on 4th here. But Coach Hedrick, how's your Lent going, right? We were about 2 weeks in. Ash Wednesday was 2 weeks ago. We talked about Valentine's Day, Ash Wednesday, same day, right? Talked about how we met our wives, Peyton, Jen. First of all, was your wife okay with that episode?
She liked the episode.
She was good with it?
Yeah,
Okay.
She said I was too good to her.
Peyton was happy with it, too. She
good.
was happy with it, too. So I think it was a win. That was a win.
That was good.
Doesn't matter who else listened to it. Our wives were happy. But how is Lent going first 2 weeks for you?
Jumping right into that, huh?
Yeah.
It's good.
You're doing something cool. I'm sure you'll share.
Well, yeah, I'm doing intermittent fasting for Lent. So I'm fasting from 8 p.m. until noon every day. And that's gone really well. It's been good. It's been not really a struggle so much, but yeah, I certainly get hungry at times.
Cheez-Its, I know you like your Cheez-Its before bedtime.
I got to eat those before 8 p.m.
Oh, before,
yeah. So
now, what's harder? Is it the end of the day or the morning that you're like, man, I'm really craving?
The end of the day is harder.
End of the day.
Yeah, because I'm kind of a nighttime person, so I stay up too late.
Watch games.
So that's been more difficult.
So intermittent fasting, okay.
Yep, that's been good. And then just daily prayer. That's been a big thing for me. For Lent is being really conscientious of daily prayer and making sure that becomes something that I do throughout Lent, and that's really been even more rewarding than the fasting.
Is that the morning or at night, or do you have like a time where you're like?
That's the morning typically,
time,
and I try to be mindful throughout the day. It's sort of a constant dialogue going on,
amen.
Which has been really fun for me and really good for me. But certainly in the morning when I wake up is sort of the first thing I do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I was just telling somebody we're talking about like marriage. He's getting married actually. And he was like, man, once you have a baby and you're married, like, how do you find time for prayer? And I noticed, morning time, that's got to be it, right? It's got to be early in the morning. Because otherwise your day, especially as a coach, man, your day gets booked up. And you get to the end of the day and you're like, man, I didn't even make time for prayer. So you have mornings, man. I agree. But for me, my Lent's been funny, man. I had these, big goals, and a few of them have worked out really well. Like, one in particular that has been great has been anytime I'm driving, a lot of times I would turn on a podcast or, listen to The Heights every day. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Or turn on a podcast or turn on music. And but this Lent, I've done this before, but it kind of got away from it, is not turning on anything and just having that quiet time to pray. And sometimes I'll pray the rosary or whatever it may be. But it's amazing how much time you spend in the car every day.
Yeah.
You're like, some people it's hours, So it's like, man, what do we do with that time, And that's not to say listening to music or a podcast is bad, But I think that silence has been really good the last few weeks in the car. But one thing I noticed too, especially with giving things up. So I got sick right before Ash Wednesday, and it kind of was lingering. And for 2 weeks I was sick and had to stay home from work a couple days. And I remember just kind of being frustrated. I was like, man, I was ready for Lent. Ash Wednesday's here, and I was ready. Had these great things I was going to not eat this, not do that. And now I'm just sick in bed, drinking ginger ale, and I just felt like the Lord saying, you know what, this is what I'm asking you to give up. It's just this struggle you're having right now. And I even felt like a bad husband because, Peyton was having to do all the chores. I was bedridden for a couple of days, or I acted like I was.
Right, of course.
She would have been fine if it was her. But she was taking care of the baby and doing everything. And she even said at one point, I miss my husband.
Yeah.
And I felt terrible. And I felt like such a bum. But I was trying my best to get better. But I also felt the Lord saying, no, give me this frustration, and my throat hurt real bad. Just give me what you're going through right now. Don't add anything in extra right now. Just give this to me with a joyful heart. And I don't know. I think there's so much power to that. Whatever we're going through in the moment, just giving that to the Lord, good, bad, ugly, whatever.
Right.
So it's just a good reminder for me.
No doubt.
It took me a couple days to realize that, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's always good when we get sick and our wives have to take care of us. That's not a fun reality, right?
Yeah, but our wives are so good, man, as we talked about last episode.
Yeah.
But really, in this episode, Lent, we're preparing for Holy Week, right? With the holiest week of the year in our church, where Christ really enters into that final fate, right? The passion, death, and resurrection. And really that whole idea of redemptive suffering,
right.
And I know growing up, you were talking a little bit beforehand, how often that phrase offer it up is, it's super Catholic, just offer it up, anytime your kids are complaining. But what does that mean for you, Coach Hedrick? Redemptive suffering, even in football, you see that, right? But what does it mean to have suffering, which is not no one wants to suffer. It's not ideal. We wouldn't choose it for ourselves.
Sure.
But for that redemptive aspect of it, where have you seen that play out in your life?
You know, it's funny that right before I came up here, I was talking to Coach Garrick, our offensive line coach, and if you really want to break it down to like a football sort of situation, he talked about offensive line. He said, Coach, offensive linemen are experience redemptive suffering every single day. You know, it's something I've been really talking about a lot and thinking about a lot more than I normally would have, because we were going to talk about this topic. And just the idea of it's really not about me, and being able to offer things up, like you said, those experiences, the things that we go through, the trials and tribulations or the struggles, and thinking about Jesus when he went through what he went through on the cross and dying for us and for our salvation, and that he was human. And that he struggled with so many of the same things that we do. And thankfully, most of our suffering is not the same. But to be able to understand that we're journeying with God and with Jesus through our suffering, and be able to offer it up to him, I think that reality has kind of hit me pretty hard when we started talking about this topic. And so it's been fun to think about.
Gosh, man. Well, you just said, like, so often I think we forget it too, like Jesus' humanity. You know, and we think about the physical suffering he went through. Even like that night of the agony in the garden, you know, the Last Supper, he gives us the Eucharist. You know, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, and he starts to sweat drops of blood, the scriptures say. Like, think of like the agony and the anguish, you know. Like, I know what it's like to sweat, and like I know what it's like to bleed, but I've never sweat blood, the anguish and the pain. I forget the medical term that has to do with that. That's a medical, you know, it actually happens sometimes. But to think about, man, what kind of mental and emotional anguish he was in. And then the physical side of it, right? Like, the scourging, the crucifixion, carrying the cross. But one of the most powerful things I heard years ago, and it's always stayed with me, is that, like, why would God, the God of the universe, humble himself? Like, he didn't need to do this. Like, he could have snapped his fingers and said, you know what, humanity, you're redeemed. Like, you're saved, right? And I'm sure theologians could argue this all day. You know? But, like, why did he do this? And I really think at the end of the day, like for me, this is kind of the conclusion I've come to, is just like, because he knew that every one of us would have those moments of anguish. He knew that we would have our crosses and our struggles and that are so unique to each and every one of our lives. But every one of us has them. Some of us could last our whole life, some last a minute, you know. But he wanted us to know that he's in it with us.
Yeah.
You know, he's not a God that just stays far away and he's like, all right, do it yourselves, right? But he said, I'm going to get in the trenches with you. I'm going to be there when your mom dies. I'm going to be there with the cancer diagnosis. I'm going to be there when your son stops talking to you. Whatever it is, you know? And it's like, I'm with you.
If you think about it, he was the great teacher.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, he wanted to establish credibility.
Yes.
We talk about that all the time as leaders. Yeah. We talked about that before, I think. It's just, he is the ultimate leader, right? And to have credibility so people will believe in him. And having gone through what we all have had to go through, he can speak to it more intelligently than anybody ever could.
Yeah. What are those 3 C's? Building trust. So you said one of them, credibility.
No, that wasn't one. That wasn't. Oh, it's not. But it's a part of it, right?
Yeah.
So
what
it's
are
character, competence, and connection.
Jesus does all 3, and he has the credibility. Yeah. Oh, so beautiful, really man.
You know, I was going to ask you about this. I've been thinking about this. This has been heavy on my heart for the last couple of weeks. I don't want to get off topic, but I think it's actually on topic.
Yeah.
My son, Luke, who's up at Furman University, recently had a teammate passed away. And it was a really traumatic, as you can imagine, a 21-year-old, perfectly healthy young man from an only child.
Yeah.
And kind of walking with Luke through that experience from afar, you know, he's in South Carolina, and kind of thinking about that and feeling that during that time. And one of the things I said to him, and I don't know how well this sat with him or even how well it would sit with anybody else, but I think that the suffering that not only, you know, this young man, obviously he's in a much better place, and we believe that truly deeply in our hearts, but for the people that are still here, the people that have missed him, the people that mourn his death, that they're suffering as well. Yeah. But I was telling him, I think that like this young man gave him such a gift, and his teammates such a gift, because in his death, they all came together. They all learned to appreciate what they have. They all learned to appreciate the gift of life and the love that was a part of that whole experience with that team and those teammates.
Yeah.
And I kind of really felt deeply that it was going to serve them so much better. And so even, I don't know if that's a type of redemptive suffering or if they're experiencing that now. I was trying to piece that together in my head, but I want to see what you would make of that.
Yeah, man. Oh, gosh. As you described that, it's one of those things, too, of like, I heard this years ago from a priest and like God's will, like so often, like, oh, it's God's plan. It's God's plan.
Right.
Like, so if my, something bad happened to Gemma, our daughter, like, you just write it off as like, oh, that's just God's plan.
Right,
it's
right.
like, what? Like, God loves her. I love her. That's my daughter. Like so many of us, like we struggle with, God, like, aren't you in control?
Yeah.
Because if God's all powerful, right? We believe God's all powerful, but we also believe he's all good, that he loves us. So if someone is all good, all powerful, how can anything bad happen?
Sure.
Right? Like if you control everything, right?
Right.
And that's a mystery. It's a mystery. And I think it really comes down to really like this distinction, and it's helped me a lot, is God's perfect will and his permissive will. And God's perfect will, right, created, like if you go back to Genesis, right, our theology of creation, right, and that story, what that story teaches us, right, we don't read it like a science textbook, but what it teaches us is that God created perfection, right? Even the number 7 days, right, is the number of perfection for the Jewish people, right? So he created perfection, beauty, perfect harmony in creation amongst animals, humans, nature, right? And then what happened? We decided to separate from God, to choose something other than God, right? That's what that fruit represents, right? And so when that happened, that's when sin and pain and evil and what we experience as suffering really entered in our existence, in our experience, right? So God's perfect will, right, for us to have eternal life with him, to have eternal joy, perfect peace, that's what he desires for us, right, as a father. But his permissive will, where he gave us freedom, and he respects that freedom, right? Because it's kind of one of those things like when you play a game with a little kid, right? Like if I'm playing it with a 5-year-old, Monopoly or chess, like, I could make every move for him, right? And
make him follow the rules.
Yeah, make him follow the rules. That's hard to do. But like if I was doing every rule, like every move for him and saying, no, move the bishop this way and the king this way. And if he beats me, did he really beat me? Like, did he do anything?
Sure.
Like, no,
Right.
But if I give him the freedom to say, okay, Johnny, like, take your move, and if he beats me on his freedom, it's like, wow, he just beat,
Right.
So I think it's similar. That's not a perfect example, but I think God values human freedom so much and the ability to love with that freedom. But the converse side is he's also risking that we'll hate and that we'll not love, right? So I think, gosh, man, like God's perfect will, he doesn't desire pain, doesn't desire suffering, but he's given us this freedom. And with freedom is the greatest good in the world is that we can love. We can love the way Christ loves. And I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
but
it does. Yeah. I mean, I think of it as sort of, we talked about the show The Chosen, which for me, again, was just so interesting to see it in that context where you can actually see people and characters and stuff like that. And so it gives me a visual a lot of times. And it made me realize that, when Jesus was on earth and having relationships with people and establishing trust and credibility and journeying with people and the disciples, he had so many experiences just like we have, right?
Yeah.
And he had free will, and the people that were with him and that followed him or that chose not to follow him all had free will as well. Yeah. So it's sort of all the same thing, right? And I think I always think of it as sort of our earthly experience. Like there's so much better waiting for us, and God gave us this freedom to experience what being human is all about. Yeah. And with that comes the ability to make choices, right?
Yeah.
And to suffer.
Yeah.
And so, those things I think are really important to help people try to understand. I mean, I'm always trying to understand it. And like you said, there's a mystery of faith involved in all of it, right?
And like we were just kind of talking about the free will aspect. Like that's one side of pain and suffering. Like someone makes a choice that causes us pain. But then there's the other side of like a hurricane. Like nobody chose that, right? Like or this young man passing away. Like that was an illness, right? Like so it's like, man, what God, where were you there? Like holy smokes! Or I heard a story about a mom and dad who's you shared the podcast with me. The man whose child drowned in the pool. I forget his name. Granger Smith.
Granger Smith.
So check him out. Beautiful story. But like, man, when suffering and pain happens, that it's not someone's choice, but it's just an accident. It's just a freak thing. It's like, God, where were you then?
Right.
And I think that is where it comes down to like, man, like, I don't know we can't explain that away. We can't explain like, oh, it happened because of this and this. Even if we see beautiful fruit come from it, like your son, like,
right.
even when we see beautiful fruit, the team came together, they value life more. Man, it doesn't sometimes make the family feel better.
No.
Like, it's like, I still don't have my son though. You know?
Right.
So it's like, comes to that point where we say, you know what? Do I trust God as a father? You know, like, even in this darkness and pain, and that's the hardest question, because no one can answer that for you, you know? And coming to the Lord and say, Jesus, like, I don't understand this. Like, I don't understand why, you know, my mom has cancer, whatever, right? Right. My son passed away unexpectedly. But I know you're good and I trust you. And that's it takes courage, it takes faith, and it takes like that ability to know Jesus is, that he loves us, right? Trust. And a lot of times we won't see what Jesus sees until we meet him face to face. You know, like I love that image. Somebody told me once, like, it's kind of like some of those beautiful tapestries, those Persian rugs. Like, you see one side that's beautiful, right? You see the incredible design, the colors that are, you know, brilliant. Then you see the other side, and you kind of see the ugliness, like the weaves and where the threads broke and everything. You know. Yeah. And I think on Earth we kind of see the ugly side. We're kind of seeing like, oh, like that happened, like, ooh, you know, that pain, that suffering. But someday in heaven, you know, and we don't know like the why, the big picture.
Right.
But someday in heaven, you know, that faith, they would say, okay, God, like what was going on? What happened there? And we don't know until we see that beautiful picture God sees. And there's no way to know that. There's no way to see that until we're, you know, with him face to face. And, you know, anyways, I don't know. I don't want to like make light of suffering either. Like,
sure.
As we talk about it, you know, like sometimes we're talking about free will or like God has a plan. Like, man, suffering is so real and it's debilitating and it's hard. And, you know, like, so I don't know. Am I making sense? You know. Yes,
I do. And even my story, I don't want to make light of it either. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. Yeah. But I mean, that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to learn. We're trying to have these conversations, and people who might be listening, and you know, and I was very clear at the beginning of this podcast. I don't know anything really. I mean, I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants, but I'm in this journey and. And I think the question is okay, right? Yeah. And to ask God why is okay. And I think that's all part of the process of trying to get closer to God, which is what we're really ultimately trying to do during Lent.
Amen, Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to make this, you know, kind of personal, I don't know if we said we were going to ask each other this, but was there a moment in your life where you don't have to share, you share whatever you like, but where you really felt like in a place of darkness and you were like, man, like this suffering is more than I bargained for, you know, whatever it may be. Yeah. I don't know if you can think of anything.
I can. I mean, one jumps to my mind right away, and I talked about this before, but when my mom was an alcoholic, and she passed away at a fairly young age through complications from alcoholism, and just really could not beat it for a long time. But when I was very young, I was 13, I think, we were driving in the car with my two younger sisters in the back, and she was driving, and she was not well, and I didn't realize what the problem was, but she was all over the road, and it was pretty scary. We were on the interstate, and I finally got her to stop, but I had to drive home at 13, and I was very scared, and I was very confused, and I knew something was not right. Yeah. And so I went into my room, and I remember just kind of crying and praying and asking and wondering and being pretty scared about it. So that was a pretty dark time in my life because I really cared about my mother. Our family was close. We had a lot of similarities, and she was important to me, and I knew that things weren't good. And so that was probably one of the times of many. But
what helped? Like as a 13-year-old, what helped you? Like what got you through? Because that's confusing too. It's like, man, my mom, she's having this. You know, like you don't understand it. You know.
Yeah, I'm sure that God helped me. Yeah. You know, I don't remember exactly what was said or how I heard the message, but I know for sure that was part of that. And then my family was my dad was good and he was loving and patient, and my brothers and sisters, and so you know it kind of got us through that long, you know, many years of toughness, but that was one of the times for sure. What about you?
Gosh, man. I asked, but I wasn't thinking about mine.
We always talk about
one that kind of comes. Yeah, that's right. You tell the story. You have the good stuff. One story that comes to mind. It was right after college. In college, I was like planning on med school, so I was like, man, I'm gonna be a doctor. I'm gonna make a lot of money someday. Have a big house, whatever, you know, and help people too, you know. And I did med school, you know, all the med school classes like organic chemistry, biology. I took the MCAT and did really well and everything. And I was getting in all these med schools, which was a blessing. Like the interviews were going great. And I was actually set to start at FSU. I was like about a month before starting. And I'd been playing basketball for 4 years at Davidson in college and loved it. And I had a girlfriend at the time as well, a great girl from school. And so all these things were going great. But I didn't have any peace. And I was like, man, why did I not have peace about this?
Yeah.
Like my life is like falling into place perfectly. I have this great girlfriend. I just got to have 4 years of college basketball. About to start med school at Florida State in Tallahassee, great med school. And I was like a month before starting med school. And I remember calling like the landlord of the place I was going to stay. And as I was calling them, I hung up the phone because I was like, I have no peace about this. I had zero peace about it. Because every time I'd go to pray, I felt God asking me to think about becoming a priest. Like every time I go to mass, every time I go to pray. And it was just like, wasn't like this like banging in the head. It was just this like gentle voice. And I just like knew it was from God. Like, and I like pushed it away. I stopped praying for a while because I was like, I don't want to hear that anymore. I never stopped going to church, but I stopped like having quiet time in prayer. Like every time I'd pray, I'd say the prayer real quick and then be done. Like, okay, I'm done. Like no quiet time. And because I didn't want to hear Jesus' voice, but I just knew like, man, if I want to be happy and have peace, I got to listen to his voice and like see where he's taking me. And through prayer and discernment, some good mentors, I discerned to go to the seminary and to discern the priesthood. And with that came letting go of a lot of things. So it came, first of all, I had played basketball my whole life, for 22 years, and it had been like the center of my life for so long in a way, And letting go of that was hard in itself. It was like a breakup in itself. Having to break up with that girlfriend who I really cared about and had a great relationship. And because I was in seminary, you can't, as priest, not married. So the breakup, and then also just the idea of letting go of the idea of being a doctor, of the dream I had of like having a wife and 10 kids and a white picket fence, all this dream I've had my whole life. And in a one moment like this, when I hung up that phone, I was like, I'm letting go of all that. And it scared the living daylights out of me. And for the next few months, when I finally, in the fall, a couple months later, I actually went to seminary. And man, those first few months of going to seminary were the hardest of my life. And the pain was really, on the outside, people thought I was fine. But man, I felt like my heart was just like dead. Because I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew I'd been listening to God's voice. But I was like angry at him. I was like, Jesus, why couldn't you just let me do my thing? And like, just be quiet for a little while, you know? And looking back, I saw what he had been doing. And like, I'm so thankful for that. Holy smokes, And, but just that darkness, I just remember one night, it was actually in Rome, Italy. I was actually in Rome because I had a brother over there and I was visiting him. And I was looking up at the night sky and I was just like letting God have it. I was like, God, this is terrible. Like I'm such darkness and like suffering and I'm just so mad at you, right? And I had no trust in him. And I would go to bed at night like just like empty, and I would just remember like holding on to a rosary. And because I remember like there's nothing else I can do except hold on to this rosary. Like I couldn't pray, but I'll never forget there was one night where I looked up at the statue of Mary. This is kind of a time when like Mary, the Blessed Mother, became really important to me because it was during this time where I didn't trust God. Like I was doing this and I was mad at him. I was like, man, why are you calling me this? Like, but then I went to Mary, and in Mary I really learned how to trust God. Because like I didn't want to talk to Dad, But Mom like had this gentleness and tenderness where I felt like she saw my suffering and my pain and internally, And a lot of people hearing this might be like, oh, you were fine. Like you didn't have, but like internally it was so hard. But I felt like Mary taught me how to trust. And there was this one night I looked up the statue of Mary with like her hands open, and there's so many statues like that. And I just sensed her telling me like, trust him, trust my son, and at the time I couldn't, but I trusted her, I was like, all right, Mom, like Mary, I'll trust him. Like, I'm just going to let go. It took a while, but like over that time, and I was in seminary for a few years before I discerned God wasn't calling me. But looking back, man, I tell, Peyton asked me, my wife, like, what were those years like? But those first 4 months of seminary, just letting go of that dream and letting go of the girlfriend and basketball and all the change, living 2,000 miles from home in Emmitsburg, Maryland. I saw the sun like one time in like December to March, and it just like this, dark time. But anyways, so just like learning how to trust God again, know. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Well, that's an amazing story. It kind of makes me think, do you ever wonder why so many people, myself included at times, have a hard time trusting God? but we'll trust so many other people.
Yeah. Gosh.
Not just people, but like we'll idolize people. We'll read philosophy. We'll listen to certain types of music.
Or People magazine. Or
yeah, that too, right? And it's because we believe in what these people are saying. We believe in what they stand for. We believe in all these things about people.
Yeah.
But then with God, it's so hard to believe.
Yeah.
For some people.
Gosh, man.
That strikes me sometimes as being just really interesting because we avoid it. Like we're scared. Like, to stop talking to me right now. I can't hear this right now. I'm afraid. Really, you were afraid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're all afraid.
Yeah. And Matt, that's such a good question. Like, why do we not trust God if we believe He's all good, all loving, and all powerful? It's like, why wouldn't we trust Him? Right. And I think sometimes, as you're saying that, like, I love this conversation. I think sometimes we feel like God's taken something away, or He's hurt us in some way. Yeah, like we kind of put it on God, and I think I love the image of the crucifix, and I explained this, I think, one of the episodes, like how it used to scare me, but I love the image of the crucifix because it's God becoming one of us, saying, "I give you everything."
Right.
Like, you might not trust me in this moment, but I'm not going anywhere. Like, I'm staying right here until you learn how much I love you. I just think it's so powerful. And the beauty of the crucifix, too, of like every one of us, our struggles are different, our journeys are different, but our crosses are different, but we all have them, we all journey with them. But Jesus' message is the same to every one of us, that I'm with you, I'm not giving up on you, I'm going to stay with you,
Yeah.
And man, the more we hear that, the more we can listen to that. And that's what prayer's all about, is hearing that voice. Man, the more it can hit a home and help us to trust it,
Yeah.
But man, it's such a personal journey though for every one of us. And
yeah, it is, and I think that's important to note. Really, that it's personal, and everybody deals differently, and everybody experiences differently, and that journey for everybody is different. And so, I talk to kids all the time about that, and they're not in the same place, or they feel like maybe they're not doing what they should be doing, or they're not doing something right. And there's no perfect formula for any of this, right? I mean, so it's interesting to me to think about that way, and to sort of let people know that it's okay to not be perfect.
And I love that, Matt. And I think to go back to redemptive suffering, just the idea, suffering is purposeless, it's hard, and it's pain, and it's like, why am I going to go through this if there's no purpose to it? But in Christian theology, we know that, like, Christ has invited us to unite our sufferings to His, that even the most meaningless suffering, even when I stub my toe against the door, right, it hurts, that I can even offer that up to Jesus. Say, Jesus, I give this to you. Like when I was sick last week, I realized this halfway through my illness, but I was like, man, if I give this to Jesus, it can bear fruit, in time and in eternity. It can change people's hearts as a prayer. That we believe that, and how powerful that is. And one story I heard years ago that's always stayed with me, and it's a made up story. It's like a fable, but it's this person who has a dream, and he's going through a lot of stuff in his life, and he meets an angel in his dream, and he goes to the angel, and he's like, hey, I want a different cross. Like, this cross is too heavy. And the angel takes him to the store where all the crosses are, like, what do you want to carry, and the guy's walking around with the angel, and picks up the angel points out like a light one. He's like, hey, do you want that one? That one looks lighter. And the guy picks it up. He's like, I think I can do a little bit heavier. I think you can do better. And then he's looking around the store, picks up a heavy one. He's like, oh, that's too heavy. And then he sees one in the corner. He's like, oh, let me check that one out. Like, and he picks it up and it fits. And it's like, it's like, yeah, I think this one's good. Like, I can carry this one home. And the angel says, good, because that's the one you've been carrying, and just, like, that's just a weird story. But to think about, man, like, when I take a step back and how we talk about every person's struggles are different, our crosses are different, but how even our crosses, maybe not a part of God's perfect will, but if we offer them to Him, that they can be fruitful in our souls and the souls of other people. And it's a mystery, ultimately it's such a mystery, because we never want to make light of suffering, but to know that it can be meaningful, it can be redemptive, united to Christ, Yep.
No, that's great.
I don't know. All right. Anything else, Matt? Anything else?
I think I'm good. Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, guys, hey, hope Lent's going great. Great to be back with you. And we'll be praying for you. We love you. And tune in to Spotify, YouTube, anything else out there.
Apple something.
Apple Music. All right, guys. God bless you. We love you. God bless.